Next, from Springfield, with an agreement over the state budget out of reach, we attend a committee hearing with legislators discussing what amount of federal funds within the state budget should be used to help pay for social services. This runs about 50 minutes.
First, let me start with the underlying bill, which added approximately $4.8 million of federal funds that the Senate passed. When they did that, we realized shortly after that there were some federal dollars that were not appropriated through Senate Bill 2042. So we're including those, and those federal dollars or line items would be the IHDA, the Federal Home Fund, ICCB for adult education, Career and Tech Ed for ICCB, IEMA, ISB, and there's some other various public health federal funds for a total of $634.6 million additional federal funds. In addition to that, we're also, the amendment number 2, is including funding from GRF for breast and cervical cancer screening, early intervention, Meals on Wheels, and child care. And that includes both GRF and other state funds as well. And the total for the GRF, just for the record, Representative, would be $584,892,100. Other state funds, a total of $169,500,000 for a grand total of approximately $1.388 billion.
Thank you. And a couple of questions on the numbers that you just mentioned. My analysis shows exactly what you outlined on the increase or the appropriation for general revenue funds, $584 million. My analysis breaks out other state funds and federal funds separately. Do you show that, a separate breakout?
The other state funds, we have $165 million for LIHEAP and $4.5 million for early intervention for a total of $169,500,000.
Their numbers are different because this.
Those are other state funds? If I can, what's the total involved in amendment number 2? The total amount of money involved in amendment number 2?
Total $1.388 million.
Okay, we're fairly close. I have $1.472 billion. So if we take the $584 million out of GRF, that brings us down to about $900 million to $1 billion. That has to be accounted for some other way. So you've given me just LIHEAP and one other item.
Yeah, we had early intervention.
Help me understand how we get to $900 million.
What do you show for early intervention?
Okay, let me, if I can, both Mr. Chairman and then the sponsor, let me tell you what I have, and maybe you can help me where I am wrong or incorrect in my numbers. General revenue funds, I show $584,892,100. Let's say $585 million. Almost $600 million in general revenue funds. Then under other state funds, I show $451,950,000. That's, call it $452 million, excuse me. That's under other state funds. Then under just federal funds,
can I ask
under
you,
federal funds, let me just finish. Under federal funds, I show 5 programs that equal $435 million. You add up those 3 figures, and you come up to $1.4 billion. What am I missing? Where am I wrong? Am I looking at a different number?
Representative, I was talking to staff here, and I think the early intervention line item is what we show for other state funds is $4.5 million. What do you have?
Well, what's broken out on here? We agree on the total, roughly agree on the total amount of of dollars involved, 1.4 billion, okay? That's what shows on here, that's what shows on our analysis, $1.4 billion. We're agreed. So rather than futz around with other state funds and federal funds, let's just zero in for a second on general revenue funds. We also agree in our analysis and what's on here that there is $584,892,100 in general revenue funds contained in Amendment Number 2. We're agreed to that, right? Got it. Question I have is this. The Senate passed a bill unanimously in support of the federal funds appropriations, saying these are initiatives which we want to make sure are funded. There was bipartisan support, Republicans, Democrats. The governor said, I will sign that bill. Comes to the House, and yeah, maybe we have some questions about the federal funds and the other state funds, but all of a sudden, we are adding almost $600 million in general revenue funds when we don't even have a budget. Would somebody kindly explain to me why we're doing that? Doesn't that, and I will tell you, by the way, the governor has said, you pass the bill with the $584 million, I will veto it. In other words, we are adding a poison pill to this bill. Would you kindly explain to me why we are doing that?
Well, first of all, Representative, you're right. We're in September. We don't have a budget yet, but I think we all agree and we all know that close to 70%, if not even more, of the appropriations is already going out the door, either through a court order. The governor was kind enough to sign the K through 12 budget bill. So there's some more money going out the door with that as well. So this is not any different. So the fact that we don't have a budget, we have been authorizing appropriations so far at a tune of close to 70% of the entire budget. In terms of the poison pill, we've listened to these groups, the LIHEAP folks, which, by the way, in testimony yesterday, we found out that even if they were to get all their money today, they're going to be behind like 3 months into the heating season, which starts September 1st. So we're going to have folks come November and December, maybe even January, that need their services restored. And already, best case scenario, they're out of luck. So we're not sure what's going to happen. Their breast and cervical cancer screenings, early intervention, which deals with kids with disabilities, Meals on Wheels, which we have over in Schaumburg Township as well, as you know, in child care. I wouldn't consider that a poison pill. It does, so I hope we just don't keep calling these poison pills.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I will respectfully disagree. And I'll leave LIHEAP, and I know you have a special attention to that. I'll leave LIHEAP out because that's in the category of other state funds. Let's just look at general revenue funds here for a moment. There are 5 categories of general revenue funds that are included now that have been added in Amendment Number 2. Early intervention for $82.5 million, breast and cervical cancer for $11 million, home delivered meals $11.3 million, child care assistance for $480 million, and senior meals, administration of that for about $30,000 or so. But that adds up to $585 million in general revenue funds. And the difference between doing this and the monies that have already gone out the door is, quite frankly, this. The legislature, except for the education bill, has been irrelevant, which I think is wrong, but we have been irrelevant with all those other appropriations because they are either on a continuing appropriation, they have been ordered by courts that they have to be made, which takes the responsibility and authority away from us. Be that as it may, those payments are going out the door. These payments would only go out the door if we pass the bill. There's a big difference here. And I would tell you that One, we know the governor has said, he has come out and said, I will veto this bill if you put $585 million of general revenue in the bill. We know he's going to do that. The second question I would ask is this: at what level are we spending? I mean, all of these payments that are not under the control of the General Assembly, that the court has said you will make these payments, at what level are we making the payments? We're making the payments at the level, I assume, of last year or even higher. We're making Medicaid payments at a higher level this year than we were last year because the reforms that we enacted last year sunsetted on June the 30th. So Medicaid providers are actually getting more now than they were last year. So how much are we spending? Are we spending 35, 36, 37, 38 billion dollars? I think we ought to know before we appropriate $585 million of general revenue funds. So I think you will find some resistance, if I may be so bold, from our side of the aisle in passing this amendment. Thank you very much.
Well, if I may comment, by the way, I appreciate the comments, Representative Havers. You mentioned the education bill. We added close to $200 million more from last fiscal year. Just for the record, the line items here under GRF for the items that I just mentioned, they're below last year's fiscal year appropriations. I mentioned this when we passed the spending bills out of the House, that the governor has some tools available to him. He can either veto the entire thing. That's his prerogative. He did that with some of the budget bills that we passed out onto him. He did sign one of them. He has that option as well. Or he can just line item veto and reduce the spending if it feels that way. But that's part of the process, and we're hoping that, again, we think these are very important issues that impact the health and in some cases the life of our citizens. But he has that option, and he's already demonstrated that he knows that. Again, he vetoed some bills, and he signed some. He signed one. So we need to move the process forward.
Before we move on, I have several letters to read into the record from the House Republican leader Jim Durkin, the permanent member Christine Winger will be reported by temporary member Tom Dimmer. Permanent member Tom Morrison will be replaced by temporary member Patty Ballock. Dimmer has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Crespo, I'm interested in the difference between this amendment and the bill as it passed the Senate. As the bill passed the Senate, how much GRF was appropriated?
As I mentioned earlier, the underlying bill had close to a little bit over $4.8 billion in federal funds only.
So no GRF was appropriated in the bill as it passed the Senate?
$4.8 billion in federal funds only. Correct.
And no GRF?
Right.
And in amendment number 2, we've added over $584 million in GRF, is that correct?
Correct.
So I'm curious, as we look at the larger context you alluded to, much of the other budgetary action that's taking place, if we add $584 million in general revenue spending, what number does that bring us to in total GRF appropriations for fiscal year 16?
Yeah, just so you know, I just heard that the Revenue Committee is going to look into that. We have some of these consent decrees that we haven't been able to put a value on yet, so we don't know exactly what's the value of those consent
That's a pretty
decrees.
important number, isn't it?
I beg your pardon?
That's a pretty important number, isn't it?
Which number?
Understanding how much general revenue we've appropriated?
Oh, you know what? I'm with you. And I'll tell you, when you look at the budget process, Representative, again, you look at the Constitution, it's very clear. The process starts with the administration, with the governor's office, and he's required by the Constitution to present a bill that's balanced. We all know that his introduced budget was out of balance by over $3 billion. So from the get-go, the process has been flawed. We agree, we know that. We did our part.
What other flaws might have been present in that process? Have we established a revenue estimate for fiscal year 2016?
We, as far as I
That'd be a
know,
flaw in the process,
the revenue
too.
will be giving us a number. But again, I go back to the process we started with, the governor's introduced budget, which was out of balance. The process from the get-go has been flawed.
So previously, you said that you estimate that 70% of the budget is being spent right now through a
That's
combination.
what I've seen.
I mean, an estimate, sure.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So my question is, if we add $584 million in general revenue spending, how much more does that move the needle? Does that take it from 70 to 80? Does that take it from 70 to 72?
My understanding is.
What's
it's still-
left?
Well, we don't know because we have those consent decrees that we still need to find out how much that's going to take from the budget. We don't know.
Is it possible we should delay action on making a decision until we understand what we have spent so far, what we have not spent so far?
You know, delaying the process, as I mentioned a little bit ago, let's talk about LIHEAP for a bit. They testified yesterday that even if they were to get all the funding that they're entitled to today, they're going to fall behind 3 months. We're going to have people in the city of Chicago throughout the entire state that won't have heat come December and come January. So I don't think delaying this is going to be helpful at all. We
So
have the
then
shelter.
on
we
that
have-
issue of delay, we have a bill that passed the Senate unanimously that I think would have significant support in the House, a clean bill that appropriates federal funding. Isn't it true that if we pass this amendment, that will create a further delay by sending the bill back to the Senate where they'd have to concur with the amendment? That's an
Well-
additional delay. If we pass the underlying bill as it passed the Senate, we could pass that tomorrow, send it to the governor, get a signature. So there's an additional delay you're introducing in the process by having
It's
committee
a moot
amendment
point.
two.
It's a moot point in the sense that I think everybody agrees that we have additional federal dollars that were not included in the underlying bill. So we need to include those federal dollars that were not part.
We could run
which is gonna
a
be the-
separate bill for that.
It's going to be the same delay. Well, again, it's going to delay it anyway, right?
But we could take care of the lion's share of the federal funding appropriation as it passed the Senate, the overwhelming majority.
We're here today and tomorrow, so we need to do something.
I think it's very important that we understand how general revenue spending fits into the larger picture. The Senate understood that we needed to appropriate federal funds in a timely fashion. There was broad bipartisan support for appropriating those federal funds. Yet today, a half an hour ago, 40 minutes ago, we get a proposal to spend $584 million of general revenue when we freely admit that the Revenue Committee needs to do quite a bit of work to determine where we are in that general revenue picture. I think we should agree where we can agree, and that's an appropriation of federal funds, and continue to work on the general revenue side and not tie these two together when they're clearly at very different levels of completion. Thank you.
Representative, I would
Let me read
add.
one witness slip before you
I know that there's two issues here, right? There's the budget issue, and there's also the services to the people that we represent. If you want to go back to your district and tell folks, the seniors that get their meals, if you want to talk to folks that benefit from the screenings for breast and cervical cancer, the LIHEAP program, early intervention, and Meals on Wheels, they're not looking at numbers. They want to make sure that their needs are taken care of, and we've been delaying this for quite some time now.
I have another witness slip I'd like to read into the record before we continue. Speaker of the House, Michael Madigan, replaces Representative Hurley with temporary member Representative Jackson. And please add Representative Kefferwit to the roll. Representative Willis, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Crespo, wasn't it correct yesterday when we were hearing testimony, I know specifically from the breast and cervical cancer screening folks, that even if we had passed the bill with the federal pass-through, because of the obligation for matching state funds, they would not be able to utilize any of that federal money, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And that's what part of this amendment will do. It'll help clean up those agencies that are required to have the state portion in there too, correct?
Right, there's a GRF requirement in order to get the federal funds.
And so that's why we have to do this. So if we don't do something where we put in the GRF also, we're really not helping out these agencies because they won't be able to access that federal money because they won't have the state portion that has to go along with it by the federal law, correct?
Correct.
All right, thanks. I just wanted to clarify that for the record.
Thank you.
Representative Baylock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted to go back over this one more time because regarding expenditures out of the budget for this year, I don't think you can actually make an expenditure out of a budget without passing the budget unless, as what was introduced in Senate Bill 2042, the federal funding, the $4.8 billion. I think Senator Staines, when she introduced that bill, thought she would have an opportunity to help a lot of agencies and to pass something that seemed to be in favor of both sides of the aisle, which in turn it was, with that bill passing unanimously. By holding up this bill and amendment number 1, you don't even know how much we're really adding in over the last couple of weeks to the total number of the general revenue in the budget. We know approximately, even though we didn't follow the same procedure this year as far as a resolution with the revenue number, we know from COGFA and from OMB that it was pretty close to $32 billion. As you stated when you were questioned, Mr. Chairman, we're really not sure. We could have gone past over that number right now. And so if amendment number 2, even though a lot of us would like to appropriate money to those groups, every one of them is a very worthy group, but at the point, we have to think about the providers also if there's not money to pay them. And at this time, I don't think there's money because we don't have a budget. So to add in this money at this time, I think is inappropriate. And the providers themselves and the people in the services, I think would not be serviced by doing this at this time. So I think the best thing to do is to get the bill, the original bill, the clean bill passed now. We can pass it today, send it right to the governor, and address some of these other important issues afterwards. But why would we waste time by taking this bill, adding this into amendment number 2, when we know there's going to be contentious debate over this, sending it back to the Senate, then not sure if that bill will pass in that form? So I think if we really care about what we're trying to do here today, we should just pass this clean bill. We think we probably have full support or almost unanimous support, and just get it done today, send it to the governor, and address these other issues at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Yes, for the record, when you say we're going to hold the bill up, I can tell you, at least on our side of the aisle, I don't think that's our intention. I think we intend to move this bill. And to say that this is a waste of time, again, folks, let's look beyond the numbers. Let's look at the people that we serve. I cannot go back to my district and tell these folks, sorry, guys, you're out of luck. This, by the way, just for the record, this could have been a dead issue had the governor, when we sent him the initial appropriation bills, had just used his reduction veto. He could have taken out all the GRF if he wanted and let those federal funds sit there. But he didn't do that. So we're trying to correct that. In the meantime, we've heard testimony from all these groups that have come before the committee of the whole. And I'll tell you, those guys touched my heart. And I can't go back to my district and tell them, you know, just because we're at this point of paralysis by analysis, we're not doing anything, it's just morally wrong.
I will ask for a voice vote.
I just would like to clarify something. I didn't say that this was a waste of time. I said at this time, I thought it was best to pass the bill that I thought could get support to help these agencies, and that the others are very worthy agencies that we need to discuss, but that it was most important today to pass the bill that we know has passed the Senate and can probably pass the House and get moving to help people that need these services. Thank you.
Representative, if you did not say a waste of time, I apologize. We can always look back in the record. I thought you said it was a waste of time, and I took exception to that. Thank you.
Representative Kay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to take a few moments and be very careful about what I've heard said today, but I want to preface some comments by asking the chairperson some questions, because I think we need to make a record before we make a point. First of all, Mr. Chairman, are you aware that in the last 15 years we have only had one balanced budget?
I've only been here 9 years, Representative, so I can't say that, but my understanding is that we have shown budgets in the last several years that actually show a surplus. So I guess it all depends what you're looking at, but I don't necessarily agree with that statement.
Okay, well, if you go out on the comptroller's website, you will see year by year the deficits that are listed. So this is not something, Mr. Chairman, that I am making up. So again, I want to be real careful about what we talk about today. How much money do we have in the bank today as you understand it?
Well, you can tell us. I mean, I don't have that information before me right now.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, sir.
I said I don't have that information before me, Representative. If you want to share with us what you have.
Well, let me ask my second question then. How much money do you expect to be in the bank within the next month?
It's a very dynamic number, Representative. We have some consent decrees. We have other things that are taking place. So we have monies going out, and some of the funds we can't even predict how much is going to go out. So it's going to be a very difficult question to answer.
Well, this shouldn't be as tough. What is our contingent liability when it comes to the monies owed by the state of Illinois?
Are you referring to the interest rates that we pay?
No, I'm talking about the contingent liabilities. That's a term that we never use when we talk about budgeting, but it means monies that are outstanding and owed, whether it's 1 day or 10 years. How much is it? How much can you value that amount at?
Well, we're hoping to hear from you. Maybe you can educate us.
Well, I'm asking the question because we're throwing around numbers here like it's chump change, and I'm sorry, I just disagree with that. Let me ask you a different question. In fact, I'll give you the numbers later. Let me ask you a different question. What happens when a company goes bankrupt?
Well, depending on the chapter, but they pay reduced debt.
Well, sometimes yes, sometimes no, but generally, if a company doesn't have the ability to refinance its operation or restructure its organization, it shuts the doors and provide bidders get in line. That is, people that are owed money get in line for what is called a priority standing. So my question is, if a business can't operate without any money, how does the state?
Well, a couple of things. Keep in mind, I come from the private sector as well, Representative, and to say that we can run the state as a business, there's some business principles, I agree with you, and I'll give you that, I think we could apply. But there's a fundamental difference between a business and running government, and that is that social responsibility thing that gets in the way. And we just can't run a budget and ignore the social responsibility aspect of this. So one of the things I learned in the 9 years I've been here, that as much as I wanted and I thought that we can run government as a business, it didn't take me long to figure out we can't do that, because unlike a corporation, the other thing too is I only had one voice I had to listen to, the board of directors, and they spoke with one voice. They're very clear what was important. Here we have multiple voices we need to listen to. So there's just so many fundamental differences between running a government and running a business.
But there is no difference between one entity and another running out of money and not being able to do business. Is that not correct?
Well, I mean, a business can, number one, file bankruptcy, as you stated. We cannot.
Right. Okay,
yeah.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Oh, go ahead, I'm done.
So I guess my point is here, before I move on, we've talked a good deal about our standing here in the state, and obviously for the last 13, 14 years it hasn't been very good, and what we see today is we've just hit the wall, so to speak, as they use in racing terms, and yet we are very flippantly talking about telling the Senate they're wrong when they might have been right, unless there's some political ulterior motive to this display today. I'm not sure there is. I've seen politics put before people just about long enough here, and it's pretty stagnant, pretty old, and it's become very sickening. But I think the people, while we talk about those that are in need, we have plenty of them. And when we talk about taxpayers who are begging for help, we have even more. And I think, Mr. Chairman, the feature that you leave out here is the fact that someone has to pay these bills. We aren't going to go bankrupt. And those people that you go back to and talk to in the district, I think you better tell them that they're on the hook for all this extra money that you want to spend, all together worthy, because we haven't been able to run a good fiscal shop here for at least 14 years. Now, my next question is, how much money have we spent in terms of court orders, mandated court orders?
I'm not even sure if we have that figure yet. Again, it's a very dynamic number. Give me 1 second, Representative. Yeah, I understand that there's some discussions with the agencies. It's a little bit unclear as to what it is that they're expecting and what their liabilities are. So I understand the Revenue Committee will be looking and investigating to find out and hopefully put a value on that.
All right. I have the same question then with respect to consent decrees.
As I mentioned before, we still haven't been able to put a value on that either.
Okay. And then finally, how much indebtedness with respect to bonding, that is bonded debt, and you can refer to it all or you can refer to it in a class, do we have currently owed by the state of Illinois just this year? Bonded indebtedness.
I'm pretty sure the information is out there. I don't have that available with me.
Mr. Chairman, I would say this. There's nothing that discourages me more as a legislator than us sitting in this room today and many, many other times debating serious issues that impact lives of people in a very serious way and not having facts or figures. And I understand that as I understand it, you just picked this amendment up yesterday, so I wouldn't expect you to be informed, but I would expect somebody to be able to provide the answers that have to do with the financial status of this state before we go off and start spending money that we don't have. Now, if you guys, and I say you guys, can persuade Republicans that we need to pass a terrific tax increase, then I think we're good to go. But otherwise, you're spending funny money. You simply don't have the funds based on what I understand is coming into this state. You don't have the funds to pay everything you want to do. Do you agree with that, sir?
You know, let me be very clear. I'm not asking you or I'm asking anyone for a tax increase. It's not for me. It's not for any one of us here. If, in fact, there's any discussion about more revenue, it's not about me, it's not about the Democrats, it's about all the people that we represent. Now, you tell me, if you don't want to, you're looking at a tax increase, and let me be very clear on something else. The governor keeps telling everybody that he's okay with a tax increase provided we accept his turnaround agenda. And he's making it sound like every single Democrat is going to support a tax increase. That's not the case. That's a flawed assumption. So let's talk about the folks that we're talking about here today, those that need LIHEAP dollars to get their services restored before the heating season. Let's talk about folks that need screenings for breast and cervical cancer, the early intervention, kids with disabilities, Meals on Wheels for seniors, child care. You tell me, which ones should we take out of there?
Well, I'm not going to tell you anything because you've had 14 years, 9 in your case, to get this right. And I'm not picking on you because I think you're a good and honorable and decent man. But I am saying that there's a reason, and it goes back more than 14 years, that we are in the position we're in today. And by golly, I wish someone would start telling the truth about why we're sitting here today and doing this. And apparently that's not going to happen today. I'm going to close, Mr. Chairman, by just saying this. When I go back to my district, I tell people what we're trying to do to keep this state in survival mode, and they keep saying, how much is it going to cost me? Because I can't afford to live in this state anymore. So maybe we've gotten our priorities wrong. Maybe we've got them wrong. We need to take care of the most needy. We need to take care of those who are sick and disabled. But by golly, everything else in between we didn't need to do, and that's what puts us in the place we are today. What I think today of this budget, or this process, is that it's tantamount to a Ponzi scheme. We have no numbers. We have a bunch of categories that we call good but can't pay for, and we have a chairman, and again, in all deference to you, we have a chairman who hasn't been able to find one critical number that we need to pass a credible bill today, and that's a shame. Thank you.
What I mentioned earlier. The budget process was flawed from the get-go. Our governor introduced a budget that was out of balance for over $3 billion. He had an opportunity when we did send him some bills to use some of the tools in his toolbox to make it balanced. Number two, you're going back 14 years. Let's go back 20 years. I mean, I'm not in the business of pointing fingers here, but yes, for the record, if you look at the situation we have today, it really goes back almost 20 years. A lot of it is driven by our pension problems. And if you look back, under Governor Thompson, during his administration, that's when they passed a 3% compound for the pensions. Under Governor Edgar, they had a pension reform bill. They had a ramp that put us in a tough spot today. Just as an observation. I'm not criticizing folks here, but so it goes more than 14 years, Representative. And again, if you want to point fingers, if we want to talk about what happened in the past, that's fine. I think we're more concerned moving forward how we can get out of this and hopefully work together. And again, the governor does have some tools that he can avail himself of, and he can cut whatever he wants to cut. He had that opportunity before when we passed the budget bills too.
Representative Manley, please.
Representative Kay, you talked about being discouraged as a legislator. I got to tell you, imagine you're a parent, and incidentally, a lot of people that use these programs are taxpayers. They're discouraged. So when you said that, I mean, I wasn't going to speak, but I got to tell you, discouraged is a great word for it. Much of the reason we don't have the information regarding our expenditures is because the agencies underneath the governor's rule have not shared the information. Have they shared that information with you?
Most generally, I go out and I find my own information. I don't vote on legislation until I have it, ma'am.
Okay. Did you, this is a general comment. I mean, do we need to wait for those numbers and the governor's agencies to tell us those numbers? Women with breast and cervical cancer, do we need to tell them that we need to wait on that? Discouraged, people are trying to go to work. And if you want to talk from an investment point of view, for the amount of GRF, and I think the governor would agree with this, our return on that, in many cases, as I look at the dollars coming down that we're going to lose if we don't pass this bill, it's almost 50%. That's a pretty great investment, actually. If we don't, and I've had this conversation with my constituents constantly. The problem and the numbers are important. I get that. I'm an accountant. I get that totally. But if we don't fund a program, those people don't vanish. They don't disappear. They are still our responsibility. And oftentimes, it's going to cost us even more going into the future. So it's irresponsible to not be able to take advantage of some federal dollars that might help us with some of those things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Ammons, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to share in the concern, certainly of our Republican colleagues and the Democrats as well. You know, we are unfortunately here. We're unfortunately here because some of these programs, the state just cannot run without. And I'll just tell a very brief. Yesterday, I got a call from a young mother who works at a local hospital in my community, of which she was preparing to send her 4.5-year-old son to a particular program that is partly paid for through Child Care Resource. and she was already eligible for child care resource, already had and has services under child care resource, but because she changed providers, so she went from one provider and made a appropriate change of providers, they moved her case into a new determination and made her ineligible for child care because of what has happened administratively under the watch of all of these legislators and under the governor's administration. It is political. Everything we do here is political. This is a political body. So for those who say, this must be political, it is. It is a political body of which we were elected to not by the rich and the wealthy only. Not by the rich and the wealthy. Not by people who don't need Meals on Wheels only. Not by people who may not use light heap services only. But throughout the state, if I pulled any district, including my own, most of these districts have people that utilize these services. Only a few don't. But majority of them do. And unfortunately, these 4 items are in this budget amendment because they are so critical that we cannot wait for GOMB to maybe provide us what happened at Good Friday's cuts, which we never got, and where all that money went. We didn't get everything that's being administered and adjudicated by the courts, but people's lives literally are on the line. And although it is political, I am really, really hoping that instead of saying, well, we just don't know if we have the money, we know we have the money because we've been allocating money and great salaries to lots of people. And at no point did any of these members say, well, wait a minute, we don't have the money to pay that salary, that double pension, we don't have that money. But now we are saying, well, we can't do this because it poisons the bill somehow. What is poisoning the bill is that we're willing to allow thousands of families to go without adequate child care. That's what poisons the bill. What poisons is that those people who don't have child care, the mother I just described, that I'm trying to help, she won't be a staff member very long at that hospital because we won't provide adequate child care. And then she becomes possibly homeless because she has a place she has to pay for. And because the eligibility has been lowered so low, it is obvious that someone is attempting to make sure that this woman, this young woman and her child is absolutely in the welfare line where she is not currently. She is currently not in the welfare line. We are creating a great disaster of people, not numbers. This is truly about people, not numbers. We are responsible for a budget, and the human services budget could have been signed just like the education budget, and you and I would not be having this conversation. We would be talking about some other part of it that he vetoed, but that human services budget that would have included light heat, breast cervical cancer, early intervention, Meals on Wheels, child care, those services would have been covered because he could have signed that bill, just like he signed education. And you all, unfortunately, our Republican colleagues, are in a position to have to argue, in my opinion, an indefensible position. It is indefensible that you would allow children to not have child care and seniors to not have food. That is indefensible. And I would hope that you would think twice before you cast your no vote. And yes, absolutely, you cannot hide, unfortunately, behind why did you put this in GRF, the governor is not going to like it. He shouldn't like it because he doesn't like anything that is for poor people. That has been very clear. What he has vetoed, what he has said is that we are not going to fund these things if you don't give us what we want. And this is consistent. So you should not go along with it. You shouldn't go along with it because what you're really doing is making sure that women and children are left out in the cold. That's truly what you're doing. And I hope that you will take responsibility for that. And yes, you can play with the numbers, and we shouldn't have put it in GRF, and you poison the budget and all that stuff. But the reality is these are critical services, life and death services for these families.
Representative McDermott.
Thank you. The point that I would like to address is a point that I've heard made several times since May, and has become a little bit of a hot button, even a red flag for me. And this is the idea that we can pass any spending plans we want and scoop and toss the responsibility for making decisions about our priorities to the governor. Ladies and gentlemen, my district elected me to make decisions about the budget. There are 118 people in the House of Representatives that have been disenfranchised, and all of our citizens have been disenfranchised by this idea that we can, over some weekend, some people somewhere put together some spending plans, pass them through, and send them to the governor with the hope, with the plan, with the strategy that he would make all the decisions about the priorities for the people of the state of Illinois for fiscal year 2016. That's not okay with me. I was on General Services Appropriation. I don't know where these spending plans came from. They didn't come from our committee. We never did any work on making the hard decisions that we were elected to make. We don't have enough money to fill all the needs of every person in the state of Illinois. There aren't enough tax dollars in the world to fill all those needs. I think everyone would agree with that. So our job, the reason that there's a legislature, the reason that there's a democracy, is because it's our job as the elected representatives of the almost 13 million people of the state of Illinois to make some hard decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, we can do it. We just never did. I'm not sure why. I have some suspicions, and we're all being polite today and not talking about the political reasons for that, but you all know the reasons too, and certainly all 118 of us know those reasons. I don't like being disenfranchised. I don't think our voters like being disenfranchised. So I just want to protest and say this idea that the amendatory veto or the line item veto somehow makes our complete abdication of our responsibility to make a budget okay is not okay with me, and I'm calling us all on it. We can do better. We can actually make these decisions. I challenge us to do that. I'd love to do it. I came here to do it. I'm prepared to do it now. I spent all summer dancing around. I'd like to get to the hard work. Join me.
Clerk, would you please add Representative Ford to the roll? Representative Davis-Meyer.
Just for clarification, Mr. Chairman, we have two committees here today. What committee is actually voting on this, or is it voting as is this coming out of a joint committee, or how is this working?
On the amendment, the appropriation for General Service Committee members only will vote if
Okay.
there's a roll call vote.
Just general appropriations, okay. Representative Crespo, we served on general appropriations last year together, and I appreciated serving with you. I thought you were a very reasonable person, and I appreciated that time. How much extra in federal funds does this amendment spend? I got the GRF and the other state funds, but how much extra in federal funds?
This adds to the original $4.8 billion. It adds $634.6 million in federal funds.
Okay. And we've talked about this a little bit. If this amendment is added and passed, what happens to this bill?
If the amendment is passed out of committee,
If this amendment is added to the bill
yeah,
and passed out of the House, what happens next?
we'll go back to the Senate for concurrence.
What happens if we don't add this amendment and it's passed out of the House?
If it's passed out of the House, we'll go straight to the governor's office.
Straight to the governor. So if we don't add this amendment, we'll be sending $4.8 billion of federal funds straight to the governor's desk to be signed. Is that correct?
Well,
He said he'll sign it.
the way the amendment is drafted right now, Representative, we do have additional items, so we don't have an amendment with just federal funds. So I'm just looking at what.
No, I'm saying the 4.8 billion and the 40, what is it, 2042. If we don't add an amendment to it at all, we have $4.8 billion in spending that will go directly to the governor's desk to provide needed services for people who need this help. If we add this amendment, just clarifying, if we add this amendment, it still has to go to the Senate, so we're delaying $4.8 billion. And you've been here for 9 years, you said. I've been here for 2.5, and I understand the process. What we could do is we could pass this bill, this 2042, we could pass this out of here right now. We could pass it out of the House and send it to the governor, and we could add this amendment to a different bill, which could then go to the Senate and then go to the governor and let him make his choice. Correct?
Well,
I mean, just total process. I'm just talking process.
Well, process-wise,
That would be an
yes.
option.
But let me just add that the IEMA line item there for $305 million, I believe the governor's office has expressed some concern about that. They testified before us yesterday, and they pretty much told us that if they don't get that $305 million appropriated, we hamper their ability to deal with any disaster in the state of Illinois. So that's very time sensitive. So that we have to include in this bill to get it out.
So, but if you add that to a different bill, and I know there's Senate bills just sitting out there waiting for an amendment to gut and replace, you could add that to another bill and not delay $4.8 billion.
Well, we'd probably be delaying the IEMA line item, which is very critical as well.
How would we be delaying that?
Well, we're here today and tomorrow. We have to file an amendment for that. And
It could have
obviously we
been,
to
this
follow-
could have been filed to another bill.
It could have
and
been.
should have
but
been.
We are here today with this amendment right now, which includes these line
I'm
items.
sorry that you're stuck in the middle of this. I really am, because I think you're a good person. So with this amendment, we're going to wait until, it'll go to the Senate, correct? If it passes the House, which I assume it'll pass the House, it'll go to the Senate. When is the Senate back in session?
August 19th, I heard.
August 19th. Okay. August 19th. So the earliest that they could pass this $4.8 billion of federal spending is August 19th. With the additional $6 million and the other general revenue funds and other state funds. Correct?
Based on the current schedule, everything's subject to change, by the way.
So if it passes the Senate at that point, what happens if it passes the Senate as amended?
It will go to the governor's office.
It goes to the governor's office. And the governor has said he will veto this.
The governor said that he would veto all the budget bills that we passed as well. He did sign one.
He said he will veto this.
Well, and he said that before.
So
hopefully he'll see the line items. Hopefully he's heard the testimony as well. And, you know, and like you mentioned, hopefully he's not stuck in the middle. And by the way, let me just, listen, I appreciate the kind remarks, by the way, but I don't think I'm stuck in the middle. I think what makes me a good person is the fact that I care about these items and about the people we represent that need these services.
I care about these too, and we have to have honest
You're a good person too,
conversations
then.
about them. We have to have honest conversations about them. But delaying $4.8 billion for $0.6 million doesn't make any sense in
We're
my
not
book.
delaying
Let's
it,
get that
Representative.
money out there. You're not delaying it?
We're going to support this.
You're not delaying
We're going
it.
to we're going to support
It
this.
has to go back to the Senate. You're delaying it
We're
at least
going to
a week.
support this. This amendment is going to be supported by the Democrats and hopefully get your support as well.
So you're saying adding this amendment does not delay it at least a week?
Well, it has to go back for concurrence, obviously, yes.
So it does delay it at least a week. We could pass this today and the governor could sign it. You could put your amendment on a different bill, get it to the Senate. You could put it on whatever bill you want. they'd have time to pass it next week. We'd have time to pass it here. You could do that.
These federal dollars have been delayed since May. Had the governor uses a mandatory veto when we pass the budget bills, we pass it on to the governor's office. So this has been delayed since May, I'll submit to you.
Well, don't you think that it would be better to move forward on the stuff we can agree on? Don't you think it'd be better to move forward on the stuff that we can agree on? The $4.8 billion that's already ready for the governor to sign and go into place?
Well,
I mean,
I
you're
hope-
delaying those people for something that's already going to have to wait a week. I mean,
Well,
you're delaying services for those people on something that could still be on a different bill, could still pass next week.
So let me ask you this, what do we
The
do
whole
with these
thing.
folks that need these services, LIHEAP, the screenings for breast and cervical cancer, early intervention, kids with disabilities?
You can keep
The
bringing
wheels-
that stuff up. I agree.
Well,
Stuff
let me ask
like
you,
that
what do
is
we
it's
tell those
important.
folks?
I agree it's important, but you're delaying the $4.8 billion. Can you go through the list that's included in the $4.8 billion that you are going to delay?
I believe
Can
you
we
have
go
that
through
before
that?
you in your analysis.
Okay. Okay, Department on Aging, Senior Health Insurance Program, Senior Meal Program, Congregate Meals Program, Home Delivered Meals Program, Title III Social Services, Long-Term Care Ombudsman Services for older Americans, National Family Caregiver Support Program, National Lunch Program, Operations Administration Services in the Department of Ag, Agency Operations, I can go through all this stuff if you'd like me to.
Would you please be brief?
I mean, I could go through this. I think you've got it all, but I think that initial list kind of says a lot of things. You're trying to say that if I don't add this amendment now, I don't care about seniors. But if we don't add this, if we do add this amendment now, you're voting to delay this funding for seniors.
And I would submit to you, Representative, that this has been delayed since May.
So you're saying what's another week?
This
Is
has
that
been
what you're
delayed
telling
since
me?
May. If
You're
we were
telling
so
me that's-
concerned about the
you're tell-
delay, the governor should have taken care of this back in May.
So you're saying, what's another week, huh? So I'm not going to belabor this point. I think we've gone over and over and over. We could make an impact today, actually tomorrow. We could pass this out, we could pass this tomorrow, and we could have an impact on people's lives that we all say we care about. I mean, don't sit up here and give lip service to all these different things. Can you do me a favor and call Representative Bradley to see when the Revenue Committee is going to pass
We can follow up
a
after
revenue
this. We
estimate?
can
I
follow
don't
up
have his
after this
number.
committee.
I don't have his number.
Yeah.
Representative Harris, is there anything scheduled in the Revenue Committee as spokesman, Republican spokesman? Is there anything, has there been any discussion on it? He has not gotten the word yet. So, I think it's incredibly disingenuous for you to say you care about these things, knowing that you're going to delay these services to so many people. You're going to delay it. And that's all this amendment does. It's playing politics, and I understand this is a political place. You know, the Constitution says we're all up for election. That's politics. When you get here, we're supposed to come together, come to an agreement, compromise, and figure things out. I'm willing to do that. I've said it in the past. I'm willing to do it now. I'm willing to do it yesterday. I was willing to do it 2 months ago. Let's do it. Quit playing games.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.